Drew and Tristan Tate, more faith, no religion. Cut the grass low, see the snakes, better vision. Circumcision pause, cut their heads off. Loyalty, no improvision of boss. Y'all gon' learn y'all lesson. Class in what's the science?
Read and take, brothers. Every time you speak real, they take something. Either your life, freedom or money, but them snakes coming. 300, yeah, we might be few, but hot off of sparring. Niggas carry sticks to make that bread. Not talking Olive Garden, darling Parton, looking like Dolly Parton. Please get the
History of New Year's Day, January 1st. Civilizations around the world have been celebrating the start of each new year for at least 4 millennia. Today, most New Year's festivities begin on December 31st, the last day of the Gregorian calendar, and continue into the early hours of January 1st. January 1st becomes New Year's Day. The early Roman calendar consisted of 10 months and 304 days, with each new year beginning at the vernal equinox. According to tradition, it was created by Romulus, the founder of Rome, in the 8th century BC. A later king, Numa Pompilius, is credited with adding the months of Januarius and Februarius. Over the centuries, the calendar fell out of sync with the sun, and in 46 BC the Emperor Julius Caesar decided to solve the problem by consulting with the most prominent astronomers and mathematicians of his time. He introduced the Julian calendar, which closely resembles the more modern Gregorian calendar that most countries around the world use today. As part of his reform, Caesar instituted January 1st as the first day of the year, partly to honor the month's namesake, Janus, the Roman god of beginnings, whose two faces allowed him to look back into the past and forward into the future. Romans celebrated by offering sacrifices to Janus, exchanging gifts with one another, decorating their homes with laurel branches and attending raucous parties. In medieval Europe, Christian leaders temporarily replaced January 1st as the first of the year with days carrying more religious significance, such as December 25th, the anniversary of Jesus' birth, and March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation. Pope Gregory XIII re-established January 1st as New Year's Day in 1582. New Year's traditions and celebrations. Revelers often enjoy meals and snacks thought to bestow good luck for the coming year. Common traditions include attending parties, eating special New Year's foods, making resolutions for the new year, and watching fireworks displays.
Americans are likely to think of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day as a time to celebrate the fresh start that a new year represents. But there is also a troubling side to the holiday's history. In the years before the Civil War, the first day of the new year was often a heartbreaking one for enslaved people in the United States. In the African American community, New Year's Day used to be widely known as Hiring Day or Heartbreak Day. Because enslaved people spent New Year's Eve wondering and waiting to find out if their owners were going to rent them out to someone else, which potentially split up their families. The renting out of slave labor was a common practice in the South of America and a profitable practice for slave owners and hirers. Some enslaved people were put up for auction on New Year's Day or held under contracts that started in January. These transactions also took place all year long, and contracts could last for different amounts of time. These deals were conducted privately amongst families, friends, and business contacts, and slaves were then handed over in town squares, on courthouse steps, and sometimes simply on the side of the road. Accounts of the cruelty of Hiring Day come from records left by those who secured their freedom, who described spending the day before January the 1st, desperately hoping and praying that their hirers would be humane and that their families would stay together. A slave named Lewis Clark said in an 1842 account, "Of all the days in the year, the slaves dread New Year's Day the worst of any." Israel Campbell wrote in a memoir published in 1861 in Philadelphia, in which he describes being hired out 3 times. He said, "On New Year's Day, we went to the auctioneer's block to be hired to the highest bidder for 1 year." A former slave known as Sister Harrison said in an interview in 1937, "That's where that saying comes from, that what you do on New Year's Day, you'll be doing for the rest of the year." Enslaved people who attempted to resist going to their new masters were whipped and thrown in jail until they relented and promised not to run away during the new arrangement. But the history of New Year's Day and American slavery is not just remembered as all horror for emancipated people. The holiday was also associated with their freedom. The holiday became more associated with freedom than slavery when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing slaves in Confederate States on New Year's Day in 1863. Enslaved people went to church to pray and sing on December 31st, 1862, and that is why there are still New Year's Eve prayer services known as Watch Nights at African American churches nationwide. I would love to...
And now our feature presentation.
Christopher Columbus, as the first man to discover the Americas, is a myopic event that only happened in the minds of Eurocentric historians with an Aryan colonial agenda. In Wehner's book, Africa and the Discovery of America, he explains that Columbus noted in his journal that the Native Americans confirmed black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats, trading in gold-tipped spears. It was found also that the ratio of properties of gold, copper, and silver alloy were identical to the spears, then being forged in Guinea. According to an American historian and linguist, Leo Weiner of Harvard University, one of the strongest pieces of evidence to support the fact that Africans sailed to America before Christopher Columbus was a journal entry from Columbus himself. There is now a growing body of evidence to support the idea that Africans did in fact visit the Americas long before Columbus, as there have been solid claims about African explorers, sailors, and traders who made their way to the Americas in ancient times. The idea that Africans may have visited the Americas in pre-Columbian times is not a new one. In fact, widely untaught evidence exists that Africans sailed to the Americas and settled centuries before Columbus. While we commend Christopher Columbus, or should we say Cristobal Colon, for sailing the seas in search of new land on Europe's behalf, he was not the first man to make that journey. However, as is frequently noted on this day, when Columbus landed, natives already inhabited the land. He called them Indians because he initially thought he had reached India. Columbus's first landfall in October 12, 1492, most likely somewhere near the Bahamas or the Dominican Republic, was a later time in history. Let us even limit our scope within Europe, and Columbus will still not be the first European to have visited the Americas, as many genuine historians suspect that Viking Leif Erikson, who established a settlement in northeastern Canada in the 11th century, was the first European to come to the Americas. The truth is that black Africans, Indians, Polynesians, Chinese, and Arabs had visited the Americas long before Columbus. Enormous Olmec head statues with African facial characteristics found throughout Central and South America support that Africans had settled in America long before its apparent discovery, ranging up to 11.15 feet in height and weighing 30 to 40 tons. These statues generally depict helmeted black men with large eyes, broad fleshy noses. Columbus was never the first man to arrive at the Americas, rather he was the first to commit genocide. Sex, slavery of young girls, rape, pedophilias, mass mutilations, arbitrary killings, and transatlantic slavery in the Americas. The manufactured history by Columbus's European sponsors must be exposed and forcefully rejected. Columbus and his men took to hunting the fleeing Lucayans down for sport, and after murdering them, using their bodies as dog food. Surviving Lucayans fled to the surrounding mountains to escape the sadistic savagery and barbaric treatment of the so-called civilized Christian Europeans toward them. There are eyewitness accounts of fallen Lucayan warriors being fed to hunting dogs while they were still alive, screaming and wailing in agony as the dogs feasted on their limbs and entrails. Columbus saw this as a perfect excuse to go to war, and with heavily armed troops and advanced weaponry, it wound up being a very short war. The natives were quickly slaughtered, having only spears, rocks, and other primitive tools to fight with. Eventually, the natives rebelled. History has it that on Christopher Columbus' second visit to the Americas, this time armed to the teeth, he demanded that the Lucayan people give his men food and gold and allow them to have sex with their women. When the Lucayan refused, Columbus responded by ordering that their ears and noses be cut off so that the now disfigured offended could return to their villages and serve as a warning to others. The ugly picture that emerges is of a brutal man who massacred the existing population of the islands, the Bahamas amongst others. Where he landed, used girls as young as 8 or 10 for sex and conducted mass mutilations in his hunt for gold. Matthew Inman, the Oatmeal's author, not only exposes this myth but also shows us who Columbus really was. The U.S. celebrates October 14th as Columbus Day as one of its 3 federal holidays, reinforcing the myth that Columbus was a great explorer who discovered the New World. Research by some scholars provides population estimates of the pre-Columbian or pre-European contact of the Americas to be as high as 112 million in 1492, which declined to less than 6 million by 1650. The so-called discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus was followed by possibly the greatest demographic disaster in the history of the world. He described these people as having black skin, curly hair, and other features that were characteristic of Africans. Similarly, the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci, who traveled to the Americas in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, wrote in his accounts that he had encountered people of color in the Caribbean region. He also notes that some of the indigenous people had features that were characteristic of Africans, such as curly hair and dark skin. In his book, Natural History of the Indies, he described seeing Negroes among the indigenous people of Hispaniola, present-day Dominican Republic, and Haiti. One of the most well-known accounts of African presence in the Americas comes from the Spanish explorer, Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo y Valdez, who traveled to the Americas in the early 16th century. Thor Heyerdahl was a Norwegian adventurer and ethnographer with a background in zoology, botany, and geography, made voyages to demonstrate the possibility of contact between widely separated ancient peoples, notably the Ray I expedition of 1970, when he sailed from the west coast of Africa to Barbados in a papyrus reed boat. These strong currents, which Malay oral tradition describes as rivers in the middle of the sea, could have helped propel African vessels to the American continents. Travel between Africa and the Americas was possible because of the worldwide ocean winds and currents that caused drift routes from east to west. Africans were indeed sailors, that a division of Negro sea captains and mariners is reported to have been in the Egyptian navy of the 19th dynasty, and the East Africans sailed between their countries and China in the 13th century. How could Africans who are not popularly known as seamen have crossed the 1,500 Atlantic miles to the American continents? Early 14th century Atlantic expedition headed by Mali King Abu Bakari, i.e., may have reached the Americas. The launching of the expedition is recorded by Arab historian Ibn Fadl al-Omari. Archaeological evidence also supports the idea that Africans traveled to India and China in the 13th century. In his memoirs titled Rihla, Ibn Battuta describes his travels in detail, including his experiences in the court of the Chinese emperor. Born in 1304 in Tangier, Morocco, Ibn Battuta embarked on a journey of exploration that took him to many parts of the world, including India and China. There is strong and compelling evidence to suggest that Africans traveled to India and China in the 13th century, long before the arrival of European explorers in these regions. While it is possible that some of these plants may have been brought over by European traders or explorers, The fact that they have been found in pre-Columbian archaeological sites suggests that they may have arrived much earlier, potentially as a result of contact between Africans and indigenous Americans. The presence of these and other African plant species in the Americas provides compelling evidence to suggest that Africans visited the Americas long before Columbus. The African oil palm has been found in South America, including in the Amazon region, where it was likely brought over by Africans or other non-European visitors. Another example is the kola nut, Kola nitida, which is native to West Africa and is used in traditional African medicine and religious ceremonies. This suggests that Africans may have brought the kola nut with them during their visits to the Americas. Kola nuts have been found in archaeological sites in the Americas, including a site in Brazil that dates back to the 14th century, long before Columbus arrived. One example of an African plant species that has been found in the Americas is the tamarind tree, Tamarindus indica. In the Americas, tamarind trees have been found in archaeological sites dating back to before Columbus's arrival, indicating that they may have been brought over by Africans or other non-European visitors. The tamarind tree is native to Africa, but has been introduced to many parts of the world as a food and medicine plant. While some of these plants may have been brought over by European explorers or traders, there is evidence to suggest that many of them arrived in the Americas much earlier, potentially as a result of contact between Africans and indigenous Americans. The presence of certain plant species that are native to Africa in the Americas provides further evidence to support the idea that Africans visited the Americas long before Columbus. Villacorta has written, "Any way you view it, Mexican civilization had its origin in Africa." Indian scholar Rafiq Girazboy appears to have been right when he wrote, "The black began his career in America, not as slave, but as master." Even early Mexican scholars were convinced that the impact of the black explorers on the New World was profound and enduring.
Thank you